Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, welcome. And we have with us on the line Professor Saurabh Sinha. I hope you managed to grab a quick cup of coffee while we had a few minutes to go. So I want to introduce Professor Sinha. He has a string of degrees before his PhD in electronic engineering from the University of Pretoria. And many of them, of course, ladies and gentlemen, with distinction. As an established researcher rated by the National Research Foundation, he has authored or co-authored over 130 publications in peer-reviewed journals as well as international conferences. So we're very honored to have you with us, Prof. Sinha. Prof. Sinha has also served University of Pretoria over a decade, in his last service being director of Carl and Emily Fuchs Institute for Microelectronics, Department of Electronic and Computer Engineering. In October 2013, Prof. Sinha was appointed as the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and Built Environment at the University of Johannesburg, and has been appointed UJ Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Internationalization. Among other leading roles, Prof. Sinha also served the IEE as a Board of Director and Vice President Educational Activities. And I'd want to thank you, Professor, for joining us, and I hand over to you. Thank you.
All right, good morning, and thank you very much, Dr. Rajab, for that kind introduction. And good morning to all of the audience that has been here, has joined us for this event. I know this is your second day, so you've already received quite a bit of information, and I promise you that I'll take you on the same path. But I hope it will be exciting from a slightly different perspective of cloud computing and also on a little bit of an edge at the end, and I'll tell you about that later. So firstly, I'll like to introduce I'll firstly introduce the industrial revolutions, a little bit of focus on the fourth industrial revolution, and then I'll talk in terms of a skills revolution, a different but a needed type of revolution, given the context in which the fourth industrial revolution meets with us. Then I'll talk about cloud computing, and then I'll conclude. So firstly, a bit about the fourth industrial revolution, or maybe before that, about industrial revolutions generally. So the first industrial revolution, they say that if you want to talk about the fourth industrial revolution, you should be able to talk about the earlier three. So the industrial revolutions have generally leveraged a particular type of technology that has, or a form of energy that has been its key component in its realization. So the first industrial revolution was on the back of steam water and led to the first kind of mechanical production equipment. From there, the second industrial revolution, which was around electricity and mass production, so electricity or electrical energy was the key component there. Incidentally, for those of you that are interested around universities, a leading university in the world called MIT, actually really leveraged the enabling components of the second industrial revolution. The third industrial revolution deals with electronics, IT automated production, or what sometimes we call digital revolution. A lot of you have it in your pocket. When you think about computing, you think about communication, and when all of that converges to your mobile device, that really is in terms of the third industrial revolution. By the way, these industrial revolutions, the first three have created jobs and they have displaced jobs. So if you think about the third industrial revolution, it did displace some of the jobs of the first and second industrial revolution, but also at the same time created new jobs. The fourth industrial revolution is it's kind of the third industrial revolution plus a very important component which deals with artificial intelligence or machine learning. Not that this was not there in the past, but what happens now with the fourth industrial revolution is that it kind of gets much more supercharged, mainly because the internet was developing at a fairly rapid pace during the third industrial revolution, it brought about lots of data, and this data converged with the tools of communication and computing, as well as machine learning that can now run on the back of that computing power, led to the fourth industrial revolution. Sometimes we think about it as the cyber physical systems, as our interactions between person, machine systems, and the symbiosis thereof. This revolution may have some different phases. The first phase is considered to be machine learning, the second phase, machine intelligence, and the third phase, which a number of us fear, is the machine super intelligence. But aside from these phases of the fourth industrial revolution, just be prepared that the fifth industrial revolution has also been conceptualized, and Europe has had a first paper on this in 2019, around about then. And what they've actually recognized, actually before the COVID-19 period, what they've actually recognized is that the fourth industrial revolution brings so much technology into the revolution that the fifth industrial revolution must bring back some humanity. And so that's really how it's going about. But if you look at the fourth and fifth revolution in combination, you're probably likely to see some of the human and machine interactions getting even closer to that symbiosis that we talked about. So a little bit about how this revolution has been going. This is actually a chart that I've derived from reading the book. The book, by the way, is called Thank You for Being Late. So if you just joined in, there's a book about it. This particular book, which has been written by Tom Friedman, it's actually a rather interesting book, because Tom was battling the very busy streets of New York, and he arrived at a restaurant before the person he was supposed to meet. And in that pause, pause is a very important part. When in that pause, he reflected on what's been going on with technology and how has it been going forward, and how is it that we have adapted to such technology. So if you're looking at this chart, this is the rate at which human adaptability occurs, and it's been happening. We've always been changing. People change, we learn, and we change in terms of our knowledge bases. But at the same time, what has also been happening is the technology has been growing at a very rapid pace. And if you look at this period, it's about 2007. And during this period, just before that intersection, you've had the iPhone come about. You've had tools like social media. Facebook has come out. And by the way, when you think about iPhone, you do think about Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs of Apple, co-founder. And I know that many of you think of Steve as this charismatic person, lead person in marketing. But on the other hand, do resonate with his surname as well, Jobs, because Apple did create a lot of jobs. And I do want you to keep that in mind, because often when we're dealing with these technologies of the future, we do absolutely recognize that there will be jobs that will disappear, but there will also be others that will in fact appear. So what happens with the fourth industrial revolution and our strategy, not only as the University of Johannesburg, but when South Africa adopted the approach with the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, was actually to put this Industry 4.0 as a way to leapfrog and leverage the technologies that we have. We didn't expect it, but COVID-19 just did something like that. COVID-19 accelerated the pace at which technology innovation, adoption, and adaptation occurs. We have seen this. This is the first during the COVID period. We saw platforms like Zoom, which I'm using this morning, become larger in terms of revenue sources than some of the major airlines. And so that gives you an indication of how some of these jobs, in fact, shifted. In this case, due to the difficulties due to the pandemic, but as they say that opportunity and risk are two sides of the same coin. Now, a bit about, because this is also a PSET CLOUD, which means that it deals with post-secondary education and training. I do also want to acknowledge that this is a huge opportunity for those that are interested in looking at this as a skills revolution, There are multiple. The interesting thing about the fourth industrial revolution is that it does challenge traditional university setup. It does create opportunities for vocational learning. It does create opportunities for online learning, and it does create opportunity for a combination thereof. And certainly those that have acquired university education of whatever kind will find that this particular revolution will require everyone to pursue the path of lifelong learning. And so that, I think, is an important takeaway that I'd like to share. I'd also like to share that particularly for those of you that are on a management track or a leadership track, in the contribution that you make, that technologies have been around all the time, but what is quite important in this revolution is the way that we bring about change management, and we bring about the change management in an appropriate way. As we are human, we find that new paradigms can actually be very threatening. And we therefore have to ensure that in our way forward, we're able to look at those human elements that enable gradual progression, but on the back of the skills revolution. Now I'm going into some of the nitty-gritties of cloud computing, and I'm not going to go into too much technical detail, but and engineers, as Dr. Rajab introduced me, do have to have slides with some acronyms, and so I'll gently introduce some of these acronyms, and I hope that you will find it as exciting as I do. The first aspect deals with what is the cloud? Is it all the rain that we get? Well, sometimes clouds do bring problems as well. So the first aspect, you could see rain as an opportunity. You could also see it as a challenge. But now talking computing. Very simply, a cloud is another computer. It's a computer that you do not have access to. It's a computer that you can tap onto. It's an internet framework or a set of databases that you can interact with. It could also be something additional. It could be software that is available. Very simply put, if you think about your mobile phone, and when you purchase a brand new cell phone, when you purchase that cell phone, you probably don't have many apps on that phone. You might have, for example, a internet browser like Chrome. And when you look at that internet browser and you type in Gmail and you go onto that website, you start to access your data. You might be using Google Documents. You might be using another kind of service like Microsoft. You might be using OneDrive. You might be using SharePoint. And when you are actually using a cell phone without adding any new additional complicated apps, we call that SaaS, which is software as a service. Software as a service. So when you see the AAS, please don't misspell it. AAS is as a service. And so if you have one takeaway from this presentation, think about the whatever X as a service, and you can see that are pronounced on this in different ways. So the first one and the most commonly one is called SaaS, software as a service, and I gave the example. And by the way, I think that the way that the PSET Cloud in the first phase is progressing is actually a SaaS. It gives you interaction, it gives you the ability to use certain tools, gives you the ability to use certain apps, it gives you the ability to do collaborative editing. And that first phase is really referred to as a SaaS. The second one, actually, I have the order wrong. The second one should be PaaS, which is platform as a service. A platform as a service is when you have data and applications that is provided on a different computing platform. The third type is called IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service. And this particular type of platform is used mostly by system administrators. So the majority of you would be using the SaaS and would be using PaaS in terms of your usability and interaction with the cloud. I must say that the kind of cloud services you can swap. So there's not necessarily one or the other answer. you might be working initially with software as a service, like using apps on your phone. Then you might be using PaaS, and then if you get more advanced, you might be using IaaS. You may be in a corporate organization which is using all three types. But the interesting point is that if you're a small and medium scale enterprise, in the past, you would have to purchase software. The cloud computing programs gives you that advantage that you can actually use tools that are already in existence. So that's the aspect around the service. So when you're interacting with your city power, you're interacting with Joburg Water, and you're logging a fault at city power, and you're interacting through the web browser. That's an example of a cloud, very simple example of a SaaS cloud. Now, the other aspect is the deployment. So as I said, that there are different examples here. You might go into a shopping mall and you might use your cell phone to connect to the network of that shopping mall. And you might access certain free stuff that has been put by the municipality, which you can access. There may be some ads that has been added to it. And that we call as a public cloud. If you're working in a corporate setup and you have some security for certain parameters, for example, I work at a university, and at the university, data protection is very key for us. I did notice that you have had some sessions on POPI. In other countries, like in Europe, you would find that there is something called GDPR, which is also a data protection regulation. And so the private cloud, and sometimes you interact with a private cloud with something called VPN, virtual private networking. And so that gives you, kind of the idea that it's a set or cluster of computers that are surrounded with some kind of a secure layer, which you could call private. It could also be your computer, it could be your phone. Sometimes when we give access, you activate your phone as a hotspot, and you give your family, your friends access to that hotspot. You've created a bit of a private network. So the cloud is not very far away from you. If you look close, you'd probably find it on your mobile. Then there is something called hybrid. So hybrid structures is a combination, and often we may be starting with the one and then we move to the other, and in the end we may have something called a hybrid cloud infrastructure, which is a mix between public and private. Now, in terms of the providers of cloud edges, and I'm giving you some of these names because especially for those of you that are looking at different kind of career paths, and if people have just completed secondary school and you're looking at moving on to this interesting platform, the one route is to go through a university, another route is the University of Technology, another approach is the TVET sector. But separate and aside from all of those is a lot of online learning and material that is in fact available when it comes to these providers. One of them is Amazon Web Services. By the way, if you watch movies like on Netflix, that's actually on the Amazon Web Services. So Netflix, when it was created, they realized they're going to put lots of videos, but they realized, well, we're not going to have storage. And even if we had storage, data storage, we are going to need policing, physical security. We're going to need virtual security. And they said, well, why don't we take all of that kind of hardware and difficult work in terms of computing resources and put it onto the cloud, the Amazon Web Services. And from there, we then take interest in business models, because that may be the expertise of Netflix to negotiate with directors, producers. And so that gives you one example of how that particular cloud provider was leveraged. Azure is the cloud provision from Microsoft. GCP is the Google computing platform. Alibaba, very popular in China with eBay, and then IBM. So these are some providers, and all of them have different kind of courses in the skills revolution. So in some concluding remarks. The first thing is that if you look up in the sky, you often see that clouds are moving and not in isolation. So there's something called a cloud of clouds. And when we're trying to launch a new platform, if you're thinking about the PSET cloud, the one route is actually to create an avenue, like a room, and invite people to come and join. And then on top of that, what we often do, and we do this on this platform, as I see on PSET Cloud, is to have links to Facebook, to LinkedIn, and to Instagram, and to Twitter. And that's one important channel. But the other channel, which we often forget about, is that people are already on platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn. And so building the channel from the other side, like by using hashtags, becomes quite important because those, the one model is you build a room and you invite people to come. And the other model is that you take the room, obviously hypothetically, you take the room and you put it over where people already are. And in the latter, you already have a captive audience, which you have selected through the different mechanisms that social media provides. By the way, it's not, and this is another maybe takeaway, that especially when you think about the fourth industrial revolution, it's not one approach versus the other. It's one approach and the other. And so that's really an important it's almost a paradigm shift for me, because people are normally thinking about, A versus B, and suddenly you say, oh, how about if it could be A and B? And how about if we could vary the weighting of how we interact with A and B over time and over resources that we have accrued? The second remark is the aspect of, especially for the programmers, is that something called scope creep. When you're developing tools, especially when we were in the third industrial revolution, we wanted all the specifications up front. But what is happening in the fourth industrial revolution is that change is a constant. And that means that when you are thinking about developing your cloud sources or your infrastructure or your website, you must keep in mind that new users will have new requirements. And if you think about a platform like LinkedIn, LinkedIn has been able to do that quite successfully. So they had a base platform in which they had your basic profile, and then they added step-by-step different applications, including learning applications. Once upon a time, Google did the same. Google added, Gmail came about in South Africa around about 2007. And some institutions were given a very discounted rate. And part of it was because they were looking to bring users onto the platform. And once the users are there, then they start to build additional capability, like Google Drive came about. But you do have to think about this from a perspective. And that's why maybe that pause is important, because you do have to think about this from a long-term perspective, that initially you would like to build a big client base, and then on top of that, you would like to build services. You do have to keep in mind cybersecurity. I gave you those AAS, as a service. And one of the as a service that has come about from the dark world of the internet is the RAS, which is ransomware as a service. And so the cybersecurity elements is another important area. And by the way, for the skills revolution, that's an important area of study, of practice as well. But most importantly, and maybe the third point here, is that around the skills revolution, I talked a bit about cloud computing, but I told you that I'm going to leave you with something on the edge at the end, and excuse the pun. But edge computing is a new area that is coming about, and that's really coming about, dear colleagues and friends, is that your computers, your cell phones is a mini computer now. And that means a lot of us are in fact carrying clouds and portals, which means that you actually have the cloud of clouds, and that gives you that form of computing refers to as edge computing. The Internet of Things is coming about in that way. But lastly is that, while we are learning, and we must keep in mind that we'll be learning constantly in this revolution, is that we should seek and solicit partners. We may find that we're not the best when it comes to cybersecurity, but we may be able to find the right partners that might be able to give us that strength. So with those words, I see I've got 10 seconds left. I'm going to turn over to you, Dr. Rajab, in case there are any Q&As or if you or others have any feedback. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Coincidentally, yesterday at the conference, we had a reminder that many citizens often wonder, where is this cloud? So your presentation this morning has really simplified many of these digital concepts that are current. And I'm also pleased to inform you from your presentation that merSETA, who is funding the PSET CLOUD and is an early adopter of the PSET CLOUD, has a full program for change management. This is managed by Mpho Kotane at the SETA, and she takes employees and stakeholders widely on a national basis through a digital transformation process. So it's really part of the program, and I was very pleased to hear that we are on the right track as far as trying to balance that technology, taking people with us through that process. So thank you for that. Your presentation has certainly clarified so many of these acronyms. I mean, it's mind-boggling. As it is in our learning world, with all our NQF, and coming on board, and then the CETAs coming on board, and then, now the digital divide has installed. Where do we go with this? How do we take people through this? So another list of acronyms, but I suppose this is what we call lifelong learning, that even, as we progress in the academic world, we take new learnings with us. So your presentation has certainly clarified many of these issues, and I'm sure there's a lot of interest now in your book as well. And then I think lastly from my side, your presentation and how you navigated, took us through your navigation of this digital world, has also given us some ideas on an advocacy campaign. We have for this conference on social media. We do have a captive audience. They have been engaging. So pulling citizens through into the PSET CLOUD initiative, we will certainly build on that. So that was also really sound advice for us. So thank you so much. I'm just checking if there are any questions on the chat. There is a comment. Multiple avenues to ensure accessibility to PSET CLOUD is an essential. And this comes from Mustaq Ali, who is representing Business Unity South Africa. And our approach should not just be a pull, but a push approach as well. So that's just a comment, but no questions. And I think there's no other questions from the audience right now. You certainly have either clarified everything, or you've got us all dumbfounded that we really don't have any questions for you this morning. So there's another comment that has just come through before we let you go. I know you have another appointment. Complex things communicated simply. So many thanks. And that comes from the CEO of JET, Dr. James Kibi. So really, this was such an enlightening presentation, and thank you from all of us. And we will let you go now. Thank you, Prof. Sinha.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajab. And maybe just on that comment about the, the accessibility, I think that is so key. And in a number of countries that has been having great progress on this topic is that these mobile providers have made it certain education platforms zero rated. I would love to see parts or segments of the PSET CLOUD to be zero rated such that accessibility can come about. And I'd also like to leave you with one link, which is to our university, because we believe so strongly in the 4IR that we have made available a course on artificial intelligence at no cost to the public. And so if you want to share this link with individuals afterwards, it's just tinyurl.com/UJ4IR leader. and you will see this artificial intelligence course. So with that, let me leave you and the audience, and thank you again for this opportunity.